Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. Today, we're talking about how to pay for college. And joining us are Ann Alsina, a certified financial planner professional from Covington Alsina, and Lee Norwood, Director of Student Success at Annapolis College Consulting, and a national presenter of all things college. Thank you so much to both of you for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Janet.
To our viewers, this episode is recorded, but if you have any questions or comments, please send them our way and we'll get you the answers. Let's get started. So first, I want to talk about a little bit about the big picture and what does it take financially to go to college these days? Sort of what is the price range of schools? And Lee, let's start with you on that.
Thanks for asking. And this is going to be a little bit of a shock factor for some of you that don't have kids who've already applied for college, but college is a lot more expensive than it was when I went through. And even when people 10 years ago went through, the costs have gone up and up. So I would say, community college is going to be a per credit price. In-state school like the University of Maryland, all in costs, I always talk about the whole package, room, board, tuition is around $25,000. And then you look at state schools out of your own home state, that will be in about the $40,000 range. And then you have the private schools out there that are really rising in cost to about $60,000 or $70,000 a year. But remember, you don't have to pay sticker price. Those schools do have money to provide to you if you present yourself well and they want you. But yeah, those are big numbers, really big numbers.
They are big numbers. And then you said that these numbers have been rising over the past few decades. Do you see those numbers continuing to rise? Do you think that there's any movement on legislation to change that? Or is there any talk within colleges or universities to change that?
I don't have a crystal ball. If I did, I would probably be doing Ann's job, which would, be in the stock market, but they're going up. They're going up. But again, these schools that have large endowments have money to give to kids to attract them. So it's called merit aid, and they throw money back at you or discounts back at you to get you to come. I don't believe anybody needs to pay full price for college. I will take your own state school kind of out of that mix, but if you present yourself well and you choose the right school. But back to your question, I paid $7,000 a year to go to Elon, and it's over $57,000 now. That's a big change.
Right, exactly. That's crazy. So then, as you said, there are these numbers that are on paper, but then you said that's not necessarily what you're paying. So then how do you know what you can afford? And so I think there's a couple angles to this question. One is thinking about what your own personal finances are and the numbers that you're headed on. And then I think the other side of that is if the number on paper doesn't match reality, how do you even shop for schools? So Anne, let's start with you and sort of think about personal finances. And then Lee, I'd love to follow up with reality.
It's important when you're looking at college, you have to think of it as a couple of different buckets, right? We might have some additional savings on hand, right? We might have a 529 or a Coverdell, some sort of college savings that we've already set aside and earmarked for college. We probably have some sort of funding that we can dip into, but we don't want to take our emergency funds too low to pay for college because emergencies can still happen. Some families choose to tap into home equity. They choose to tap into retirement, but it's important to consider that if you do that, what's that doing in terms of your retirement? Right? Are you going to not be able to retire now because you're tapping into home equity and 401k to pay for someone's college? You can do loans, certainly. But again, I have people who are looking at suspending retirement to finish paying off student loans. So there's ways to do it. A lot of times people also forget you can adjust current spending to provide some money, right? Like if you're paying for a private school now, that money that you're already paying for private school can go towards college. For some people, it's a matter of, for the next 4 years, we're going to really crimp our budget. We're not going on vacation. We're not going to be eating out as much. And that creates some cash flow to be used to help pay for college.
Okay, that's helpful. What do you think, Lee? How do you know then what's really happening in terms of the price if it's not necessarily what you see on paper?
Well, a few years ago, there was a law passed that every college has to have what's called a net price calculator on their website. So you could go to any college's website and answer some questions. Some are really detailed, others are just kind of a broad brush stroke across what you would be paying if you were a student based on who they are. The proxy for that is typically their GPA and their test scores, and who you are as a family financially. And the proxy for that is, well, it was your EFC, which is your expected family contribution, which will now be changing. And I'm sure Anna will address that when you fill out the FAFSA. So with looking at those two things, that school will give you an average kind of look at what it would cost if your student wanted to go there. I personally am not going to suspend my retirement. I'm going to have fun for the rest of my life. So I made sure that all of this lists on my daughter's school list were schools that were going to give her discounts and her money because they wanted her to be there. So that narrows the pool down from the usual suspects where everybody's going to really a place where you can afford to pay and where they will learn great things. They just happen to not maybe know that school because they didn't hear it in a movie or the neighbor didn't go there. There's about 4,000 schools in the country. You can find some that will fit your budget. I truly believe that.
That's helpful to know. Then how do you pick the right school for you? And then where does cost factor in? And we talked just a little bit how cost factored in just now, Lee. But then, what else are you looking at, Lee, when you're looking at the right school for you?
I think we can even flip that and say, what is the college looking for from you as a student? And, the number one thing that a school is going to look for is the rigor of your curriculum based on where you go to school. So based on what your schools, the classes they can offer, what classes did you take? How did you do? Then there's testing that's a piece of that, activities that are a piece of that, how you present yourself in your voice, in your personal statement, and some other things from there. So we want to look at that to see if it fits for you academically and socially based on those things right there. Then you want to look at geographically, how far do you want to go? Florida is very close to Maryland if you live close to an airport. Right? It's actually closer than some places drivability wise. So geography is very important. But if you want to lead with cost, we can also lead with cost. And we have several tools that can do that so that you're starting off with a college list that's in your budget, because the worst thing ever is to have your student get into a school that they are dying to get into and you can't afford it. And that no is the hardest no. It's the hardest no. Because they've worked hard and they qualified and they got in, and you just $200,000 is a lot. So if you start with price and you're honest with yourself, you'll end up with a good fit, I believe.
Yeah. And Janet, can I weigh in there a little bit as well?
Yes, please.
I think it's important because we get wrapped up into the dream school, and we get wrapped up into the four years of college, or for some of us a little longer. I always like to say I was on the 6 football season plan. But right, so we want this 4 magical, wonderful years, and we forget that college is an investment, and there has to be a return on that investment. So, to go into debt for a degree that has a starting salary of $35,000 doesn't really make sense. If I'm going into debt for a degree that's going to have a starting salary of 80 or 100 or 150,000, well, now I have a return on that investment. Or even if I'm not going into debt, do I really want to spend $300,000 if I'm at a private school, and then I need a master's on top of that in some cases, depending on my degree, right? If I'm not going to have a career at the end of it, I think sometimes there's a disconnect between I'm investing this money to get higher lifelong earnings. It's not just I'm buying 4 years of fun.
Right.
This is an investment, and you need to make sure there's going to be a return on that investment. And look at it as a dollars thing, and not just they have a lazy river at the pool, and they have, hot tubs in the dorms. And so that's where I want to go to school.
Right. Lee, is that something that you talk about with your clients, thinking about long-term, thinking about master's degrees or terminal degrees of some sort? Or are you really focused on that first step?
Both.
Okay.
If a student is mature enough to be able to think long-term, we always want to look at where is your original degree going to come from and how's that going to get you into graduate school. It's always better to graduate relatively at the top of your class at any college than at the bottom of your class at Harvard, right? So that's one piece of it. But we have some really good tools. One is called Quattro Money, and we can plug in, again, those same values I was talking about before, and really look at each school and look at what is the return on investment for you going there based on your degree. It is the coolest software I've ever seen. I just demoed it to my families this week. It is just awesome. So if you have that, if you're able to tap into tools like that, also one called Tuition Fit, where our families all compare what other students that are similar to their students and families that are similar to their families were offered at schools, so that you can kind of feel like I'm popping the champagne, we got a good deal, or, oh my, it's time for us to renegotiate this. And negotiation is a play here. It really, truly is. But there are tools that families can use.
Okay, that's good to know. And so we know that these are some really big numbers, or they can be anyways. What are some ways to plan ahead for paying with college? And then I'm going to ask this question: when should you start? Though my feeling was probably like before you were pregnant.
I actually have a couple clients who are very forward thinking, and they actually have 529 accounts for the idea that eventually they're going to have children. That is not the norm.
Okay.
That is not the norm. And the simple fact is, theoretically, yes, you should start when your child is born. If you're able to put aside about $300 a month for that child and invest it wisely, then typically by the end of the time they graduate from high school, you should have about enough to cover in-state tuition.
Okay.
But let's face it, when you're paying for daycare, you're paying for diapers. Maybe you have 2 kids and you're paying for daycare. That extra $300 a month might not be there. Right. And as tuition goes up, if now we're looking at private school and other things, maybe it's $500 a month and you have 3 kids, right? That's an extra $1,500 a month on top of everything else you're paying for these children, right? It becomes exorbitant.
Right.
So you save what you can, right? You do what you can, and then you get there and then you work with someone like Lee and you figure out, hey, how much can I afford? What can we do? Right? You take what you can. And there's 3 really good ways to save. There's one that's, I think, preferable. You can do what are called Coverdell Education Savings Accounts. These have kind of fallen out of favor because they have very low contribution limits. And they work tax-wise, just like 529 plans. The other option you have is called an UTMA, which is a Uniform Trust for Minors Act. It's just a way to save, open an investment account for the benefit of your child, because they're under 18, they can't have an investment account on their own. The downside to those accounts is that they're in the kid's name, and that counts against you for financial aid. Colleges generally expect you to use about 1/3 of your child's assets, but only about 5% of yours. Right? So you're disadvantaging yourself for need-based aid if you save in one of these accounts. The other thing is that when they turn 21, the money is theirs. And a lot of people's frontal lobes are not fully developed at 21. Right?
Right.
The plus side is that they don't have to use it for college or school. Right? So maybe grandparents, maybe they get a full scholarship, something happens. So they can use that for a down payment on a house. They can use it for a first-time car, for all of those expenses that we have in life. So pros and cons of that. The 529 is a great way to save for college. In Maryland, you get a tax deduction for contributions. Really, really good way to save for college, but you are kind of limited to paying for some sort of higher education with it.
Okay. So if you could speak, Anne, just a little bit more about the 529, that would be great. Some of its limitations, but then also some of its benefits. And then I heard a recent question. We're in an interesting place being in Maryland because we're so close to DC and Virginia, and within our viewership, we have residents there as well. And I know that the taxes can get a little bit wonky, especially for like a DC resident. They're like, oh, what am I going to do? So if you could also maybe speak to that as well.
Sure. So the 529, first off, that number, that comes from the section of the tax code. Just like your 401k, if you pull out your handy dandy copy of the tax code, like, I keep in, right? You turn to section 401, paragraph K. That's what a 401k is. It's just that the tax code that governs that. And so we just call it that. So 529 is section 529 of the Internal Revenue Code. And it lays out that you have 2 types of accounts, and they can either be set up by states, or in some cases, Private schools have a consortium that have set up their own 529s. And it's just a way to save for college. So they have two different types. One is what we call a prepaid tuition. In that case, I have a baby. I say I want to make sure when they graduate from high school, tuition and fees are paid for. So in the state of Maryland, for example, we have a prepaid plan. They say this is what it costs to attend college for 4 years, but so many credit hours. You're going to pay that over the next 18 years. So we're going to lock in the cost of tuition, but you're going to pay some interest over those 18 years. It's built in. And then when they graduate, if they go to a Maryland school, great. The couple of downsides, if they don't go to a Maryland school, you get the weighted average of all Maryland college costs, right? So you're paying the same thing for the online schools, right? They're taking the number of kids in the online schools times the number of kids at the University of Maryland. So you're not going to get the full ride, and you can apply that to wherever else your child wants to go to school.
Okay.
So there's some limitations if they don't go to a state school. And then they also, while tuition has been rising, it's not been rising now. For a while there, it was rising 6-7% a year, but the rate of growth has slowed down.
Okay.
So it's not rising as fast as a general investment in the market, right? The S&P 500, which we use as a standby proxy for the market, has averaged about 10% a year. Now, not in any given year.
Right.
Long term, right? So you figure if you've got 18 years, let's even say we get 6 or 7%, that's still better than how fast tuition is rising. So I like the second type of 529. And that's just a regular investment account. It works kind of like an IRA. I put money in, it's all after tax money, but in Maryland, you can get a $2,500 per parent per child tax deduction. Virginia also has a tax deduction if you use the Virginia plan. I really think if you're a Maryland resident, there is not a reason not to use the Maryland plan. I know they don't use an advisor. So some people who work with advisors, their advisors will want to put them in a different plan. I really recommend the Maryland plan and can't stress that enough because you do get the tax deduction. It's run through T. Rowe Price. So it's ultra low cost. Especially since you're not paying any advisor fees or commissions. But you put the money in, it grows and grows. And then when you go for your child goes to college, but it's also good for trade school, vocational school, any school that accepts federal financial aid is going to accept that 529 money. Right? Comes out, pays for college. Now let's say, well, my kid got a full ride. They're a genius. They got a full ride. I can take out the amount of money that they're getting for scholarships. It's just going to be taxable income, but okay, right? If I don't use it for college, I can let it roll over. So I have some people who are using it to roll over for their grandkids' college, or you can transfer it to another child, or you can pull it out and you're just going to pay taxes plus a 10% penalty on the gain. But if you figure all of those years of deferred growth and compounded growth, you're kind of breaking even on that.
Interesting.
So the 529 is a phenomenal way to save for college. But again, it is kind of limited to education.
That's helpful to know because that there is some flexibility built in, and if things don't necessarily go the way that you planned, you do have a little bit of wiggle room to move some things around. What about scholarships right now? What does the scholarship scene look like these days, and how competitive are they? And Lee, I'd love to talk to you about this. Things like where can you find them, and what is the process to get a scholarship? So if you could just speak to that whole chunk of money out there.
Sure. Thank you for asking. I think that's one of the first questions that I try to address with my families, because here's the bottom. This is where the rubber hits the road. The most money you can ever get towards the cost of education is from the institution itself. Okay. So we call the rest outside scholarships. From the college, you can get financial need-based aid, and you can also get merit aid. So the financial need-based aid, of course, the proxy for that is again going to be the number that comes from the FAFSA. But the FAFSA is looked at from the federal level, from the state level, and from the institution level. So when we talk about from the institution level, some schools will meet 100% of your need. So if the government says you can afford $50,000 for college, whether you can or not, if little Johnny gets into Harvard, Harvard's going to cover the other 24 to get to their $74,000 price tag. So that's called need-based, and different schools cover that gap in different percentages. So the proxy again for need-based aid at the institution is that number that comes from your FAFSA. The other piece, which is really a piece that we work with a lot with our kids, is the merit aid. How well do you present yourself? How well do you match with what that school is looking for so that that school will discount its tuition so that your student comes there? Those are merit aid scholarships. They can usually be found on all of the websites. They're making them a little bit harder to find these days. Some schools, it's as easy as it's a grid. If you have this GPA and this test score, if it's test optional, sometimes they'll make you do one more thing. Then you qualify for our presidential scholarship or our scholars fund, where the school is, it's not real money. They're just discounting their price so that you come there. But it's supply and demand. There are schools out there that are super hot. They don't need to discount for anybody. Everybody's standing in line to go there.
Right.
UVA, state school, phenomenal reputation. They're not going to offer you merit aid. Your bonus is that you got in.
Right.
But if you have financial need, they do have need-based aid. So figuring out where you are and what you need to spend, that's step one. Step two, there are outside scholarships. There are things like Scholly. You can use, I think, College Board has scholarships, all of those things. I say sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Get in, get the most money you can from the institution itself, and then work on those other scholarships that are out there. If you're not writing an essay or doing something for it, you're not going to get it. I mean, you might as well go buy a scratch off ticket at 7-Eleven. I haven't seen very many people get those.
Okay.
But somebody's getting them. But I will say your state senator and your delegates, they all have scholarships.
Oh, good to know. Okay.
You have to go to a state school or have a major that Maryland does not offer. But
okay.
So I don't like outside scholarships. I guess that's the end of my chat.
But you're saying one of the reasons is often they're just more work and more competitive than it makes it, the likelihood that you're going to get it is on the slim side. So that's,
I'd rather you take all of that effort and get a better SAT score, get better grades, and go use all of that effort to go make a change in this world through a club at one of your schools, because that will stand out more and you'll get money from the college that you want to go to.
Okay. That is helpful advice. Okay. So we've talked about a lot of different angles of this challenge of how to pay for college. And what role should your rising college student be playing in this whole process?
So probably not a popular opinion, but my belief is if the kid's not willing to drive it, are they really ready to go off to college? I have parents who have, spreadsheets and they're tracking everything. Okay, well, you've got to get this essay done by this date and we have to get this in. If you're not going to college, your kid's going to college. And if your kid's not that invested in it, how are they going to do when they get to school and you're not there to make sure they're going to class and make sure they're doing their papers and tracking all of their assignments by checking online every single day, right? The kid's got to be able to do it. Otherwise, you're going to spend an awful lot of money to have somebody come home. Mm-hmm. It's kind of my personal belief. I think I'm a firm believer in letting your kid drive the bus on it. Again, with the parent though saying, hey, here's the budget. Right. We can afford X. Go.
Right. That's helpful to a really helpful way to think about it. Lee, what are you seeing with your clients? How involved are students in this process, and where do you think they should be?
That's a great question. I think that, let me just back up a second. So for my families, my goal is to lower family stress. We've got parents out there who have no idea how to even start this process. We've got counselors at schools that have a 400-to-1 ratio. They can't do their jobs. And we have the mental health issues and the online school that has come around that our school counselors should all, get a crown and a gift every day for what they do. But they can't really help you as much as you may want them to in the college process, because they've got a lot going on.
Right.
So I will say that I lower the family stress. I take over that role of getting those kids organized, and we keep them organized. Our kids do all the work. I say, I'm not your Sherpa. I'll tell you which trail to go up the mountain. I'll tell you how much water to take. I'll tell you where the best rest stops are. And I will be your cheerleader when you plant your flag at the top, but I am not carrying you for the whole trek. And it works, because I'll tell you, I love kids that start sophomore year. Junior year is a must. They rise to the occasion. And sometimes they rise to the occasion better when it's not the parent asking them what to do. I think we drive with the carrot and rather than the stick, and these kids mature so much between sophomore and senior year. Not only do they get taller and they eat more of your food, but they really do. They get more and more invested in it. And we try to take that piece away. We've got parents who are working full-time jobs and tons of kids in the house and sports, and these kids are all over scheduled and trying to do so much. We like to just take the pressure down and make sure you're just doing things that matter and you're still being a kid and you're still having fun. That's my take.
So if kids need to be the critical person in this process, what, Anne, can we do to teach our kids to save money for school and learn about managing money? And when should we start that process?
Sure. I'm a little biased because here at Covington Alsina, we start literally in 5th grade with allowance workshops and go all the way up to a 2-day class, like 12 hours of high school financial literacy for kids. But I think even with some of that, you don't want to tell your kid I make X amount of money because they have no perspective, right? They don't need to see the family budget, but you can teach them about money as you go along. So when you go to the grocery store, right? Or you sit down and make up your meal plan for the week, right? And you go to the grocery store, oh, we're going to buy this box of Cheerios and not this one because the price per ounce is different. And you teach them things like that, right? Or it's, oh, you know what? Hey, instead of going out for dinner tonight, let's put that money, we want to go to the family vacation, right? So you set a family goal that we want to go somewhere for a fun vacation or we want to do something. So you're teaching them to save and budget for big ticket items. And by budget, I don't mean restricting yourself. Oh, I can't spend them on a budget, right? That works as well as saying, I can't have the cake, I'm on a diet until I go home and eat the entire thing, right? It's true, there's research around it, right? Like the way our brains just are not wired for deprivation, but our brains work really well when we say, I'm not gonna do this because I want this more, right? And teaching kids that delayed gratification, that we're not gonna put the trip on a credit card, right? Or you want a new bike, great, how are we gonna get you there?
Right.
Well, you get this much allowance, you can save, and then, okay, can you mow anybody's lawn? Can you dog sit? Can you walk the neighbor's dog? Can you, right? And teaching them ways to do that and then setting aside that money. If we're already in high school, at that point, what are they going to be responsible for in college? Are they going to pay the whole thing or are they going to pay for spending money, right? And let's say they need to have $5,000 saved. It's a good round number, right? So we say, how are we going to get there? Well, I make X amount per week at my job, especially if I'm going to work over the summer, right? I make X amount. How many weeks am I going to work? How much do I need to set aside to get to that $5,000 that I'll have as a budget for the school year? Right? So it's just teaching them those kinds of skills. So some of it is starting really young and letting them hear you make those decisions and talk about going places and making financial decisions. And some of it is, or even like we can pay for travel hockey, but we also can't do this, right? It's a choice. Everything is a choice. So teaching them to make wise choices as you go along. And you can talk about, I save in my 401k. Well, we have life insurance. What does that mean? Talking about those things, but then sitting down and budgeting with them and teaching them how to save so that they have the money they need when they're in college.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds like a mix of positive modeling, but then also active teaching and have them actually be able to learn how to budget and see what, it makes sense, how to map out the money that you need and how you're going to get there. So we've talked about a lot of different aspects of this, but one thing that we haven't covered yet is work study. And Lee, I was wondering if you could touch on what is work study and how can it fit into this whole picture?
Work study is a program that you are offered or allowed to be a part of if you fill out the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. Those work study jobs on the campus are usually kind of the best ones to have. And the college likes to hold those aside because the government subsidizes part of the kid's paycheck. So if you're reading your offer letter and it says you have $1,400 a semester of work study, your student does need to work. And they will get that money in the form of a paycheck that goes directly to them. The cool thing is that work study study comes first. It's often checking into the library or doing something where school is still, the number one thing, but you're not going to get a work study job unless you fill out the FAFSA.
Mm-hmm.
But you can still work and study. There's a lot of free time at college, a lot more free time than kids know. And there's, I don't know the average right now, but there's a place where you do this much work, you're way, way, way more successful because an idle mind, right? We want to keep busy, but not too busy because you are there for the education.
Right, right.
And I'm going to pop in. Lee's mentioned the FAFSA a couple of times, and that's the free application for federal student aid. And it's something every family should fill out October 1, right? It opens October 1. It's first come, first serve, right? So if you fill it out on the 10th of October, you're still probably okay, but don't wait until January. And you have to fill it out every year, right? I have some families that didn't realize that you have to fill it out every year or you don't get the money the next year. So every year your child's in college, so starting with their senior year of high school, as soon as October 1, as soon as you can, you want to fill out that application, even if you're not going to get need-based aid, because a lot of schools use that as the entryway to their merit aid programs.
That's really, really helpful to know. So it's critical that everyone, no matter what, should fill out the FAFSA. And then does that need to be done by the student or does that need to be done by the parent, or is it a combination? And Lee,
I would say, okay, so the FAFSA has to come from the point of view of the student. Even though all of the information is the parent's information, you need to stand behind your child while they're doing that FAFSA. Okay. Does every single person have to fill out the FAFSA? I differ a little bit on that. If you're not going for any aid at all and you just don't want to fill out that FAFSA, it's okay. There are some schools that are need aware and they know that your family might have financial need. And there's some schools that are need blind. So they don't care how much you need, can pay, can't pay. Their merit offer is going to come differently. So most of my families fill out the FAFSA, but we want to look at everything school by school. That's why I'm telling you, it should say it depends over my head. Every school is going to be very, very different.
Okay. That's also helpful to know. Okay, so I wanted to talk to both of you about some resources that you would recommend to families and students about how to navigate this process. Maybe some of your favorites or some things that you found useful with your clients. Anne, I'll start with you.
So again, going back to the idea that college is an investment. I think one of the best things you can do if you're thinking about how much am I willing to pay for this degree in terms of how is it going to pay off in terms of a career that I enjoy and that I can make money at. The Department of Labor has something called the ONET Resource Center, and it's O*NET, but the website is onetcenter.org. And they have interest profilers and career assessments. So you go in and you fill out kind of like, what's my personality? Do I want to be outside? Do I want to sit at a desk? Those kinds of things. And then it'll give you kind of a range of careers that would fit. Right. And then from there, I can say, all right, well, I would like to do that. That sounds interesting. Oh, that makes $30,000 a year. That's okay. Right. We need people in that job and it contributes to society. There's dignity in all work, but do I want to go $200,000 in debt to make $30,000 a year?
Right.
Right. What are options? Right. What's going to fit me? What's going to help me make sense of the world? So I love that onetcenter.org, and it's through the Department of Labor.
Okay. That's really helpful. Yeah, I think a lot of times kids have no idea, and even young adults. And then until they're in the situation, they're like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have made those choices. So thinking about that ahead of time is certainly very helpful.
Well, honestly, how many of us are still not sure what we want to be when we grow up?
Totally fair. Absolutely. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, something to think about for all of us. Lee, what do you recommend?
Well, I will say I was 52 when I figured out what I'm supposed to do for the rest of my life. And it's just such a freeing feeling because I love what I do. There are several different places that you can go to get information and lots of rabbit holes you can go down. So you want to make sure you're going and getting your information from a good source. There's something called the Common Data Set. It's available to everyone and it'll show you a retrospective analysis of how much aid each school gave, how much need-based aid, what the scholarships were. That's a really great place to go and kind of level set if you're kind of that data-driven person.
Mhm.
Quattro money is something that we use, which is a great way to look at a school and just see if the juice is worth the squeeze to apply there. What's going to come out? What kind of career does the cost of the school versus what you're going to make sense? Over time, kids who get a four-year college degree make over $1 million more than students who don't have a college degree. And that's
Mhm.
just facts.
Right.
I cannot wait for the retrospective analysis of 2021 because I think it's going to throw everything out the window. We don't know yet. But I like those two, Quattro money and the common data set. Also, when you go and you spend all of your money with the College Board for every kind of testing that they're having you do, they also do have a lot of resources that you can tap into. And then of course, my number one answer is just use me, but
Right.
to be fair, those other
Definitely.
sources are a great place to go.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, both to Lee Norwood and Ann Alsina. Thank you to all of our viewers and listeners. Make sure that you do visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in both video and podcast format. I am Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.